Welcome to Landscape of Mothers. I have some late night thoughts on archetypes. Recently, a friend sent me a video of Carolyn Mace, M-Y-S-S, or Miss, I don't know how to say her last name, so I apologize for that. But it was about the prostitute archetype. Apparently she's doing a series of videos on a bunch of her core archetypes. And it brought up something for me that was, that felt really important, because it sort of bounced off of Landscape of Mothers a little bit, which is to say, not the archetype itself so much, but the way that she talked about it. And in the video, I got the distinct impression that the perception was that everything that the prostitute does is bad. That the prostitute is the one who gives away themselves in order to get something in return, and that was always bad. And one of the things that Landscape of Mothers has taught me is that it's good, it's helpful to step back from good and bad, or from what we should do or what we shouldn't do, and be able to reflect on ourselves in a way with an archetype that says, here's a behavior, and sometimes I do that because that thing is important and useful, and sometimes that thing isn't helpful anymore. And it was particularly around the prostitute that I realized that I think the prostitute's strength is that she'll do anything to survive, right? So her strength is survival. And so my take on the prostitute would be that when we do something to give ourselves away, sometimes we do that when there's a strong power differential. And sometimes we do that, especially when we're little, we can use that way of being, that way that we give up part of ourselves or change part of ourselves in order to please the people that we're with, probably our parents, but usually a caregiver, and certainly someone who has more power than us, right? So a little bit more of a trauma-informed approach and a little bit more of a systems awareness approach would be to say that of course we use that strategy sometimes. I think animals do, right? So it's not just people, human beings. I think animals will sort of appease their predator. They will do what they have to do for survival, right? They'll play dead, or they'll make some sort of sacrifice. So I think it's not entirely a bad thing. We use the strategy when it works. The way that it becomes a problem, and I think what Carolyn Mace was talking about more, was the side where that strategy that we use for survival becomes a habit, and then we're using it when it's not about survival. And so that's when the prostitute becomes problematic. And I would say I'm exploring that a little bit in terms of people pleasing, right? That's a way that we give up some part of ourselves in order to make someone else happy, but we're doing it out of a habit. We're doing it out of reflex instead of doing it from a play, when it's not an appropriate strategy, maybe. So I just want to offer a little bit of grace around archetypes that I think is built into Landscape of Mothers, giving ourselves a little room for making human decisions that are based on our capabilities and capacities at the time that something happens. And so sometimes we will use that strategy of giving some part of ourselves away in order to resolve the situation as fast as we can, because we don't have capacity for lingering in it or being in it or staying there long enough to figure out another way. So if archetypes have ever caused you trouble that way, if they've ever felt like they were just sticks to beat yourself with, maybe try this approach of reframing them a little bit of like, when is that thing, that behavior, that way of approaching something, when is that useful and when is it not? I think it's way more helpful to figure out when it actually works for you, and it helps you kind of get into a place of discernment, right? A place of like really kind of like looking at the grit of a situation and getting to know something about yourself and where your strengths are. So hopefully that's helpful.